early 2020, Bucky and Creo, along with Keys and Slacks, were banned for 60 days for storm surge trading. Yet now every single pro team is using the exact same strategy. So what changed? Let's do a deep dive into storm surge trading, how it became so prevalent, and answer the most important question of all. Can it be fixed, or is this the downfall of competitive Fortnite as we know it? To understand how this became such a problem, we need to do a little history lesson. So come with me back to 2018. Ninja is playing with Drake, Double Pump is still in the game, and you're probably listening to God's Plan. God's Plan. God's Plan. Also at this time, Fortnite is starting to host their first competitive tournaments, the Summer Skirmishes. This was the first time that the best pro players actually faced off against each other. Fortnite was incredibly rudimentary, and there were often endgames with only a handful of players in them. For perspective, Morgoth basically won $250,000 and the Week 8 finals of an international LAN by using the advanced strategy of going to frontside and looking back. But as each week went on, players realized that the best way to win against the best players was to simply do nothing and collect placement points. This was made worse by a terrible point format that didn't give any points until you got 3 kills. As a result, players rightly realized that fighting wasn't worth it. But this didn't become a serious problem until the fall skirmish, where games would often have upwards of 60 players in the half and half zone. This made the game horrendously laggy, as with so many players in one part of the map doing so many actions, the server simply couldn't keep up.
Bang! 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 Bang!
If Fortnite couldn't fix this issue, the esport would become unplayable. Fortnite's first solution was implementing a few incentives, such as giving players extra points for reaching over 7 eliminations, or adding the Make It Rain bonus, which gave players large cash prizes for getting the most eliminations during a specific period of time. Although these led to some hype moments, they failed to fix the greater problem. It was still in teams' best interest not to fight. But what if you could come up with a solution that forced teams to take engagement? Well, that's exactly what Fortnite figured out when in update 6.31 they added the mechanic Storm Surge. Storm Surge is a mechanic that punishes players in the lobby who have done the least damage. On each zone, there's a certain limit of players that Fortnite thinks is acceptable to be in each zone. If the amount of players is above this threshold, then the game looks at a leaderboard of damage done by each player or team. The teams lowest on this leaderboard will start to be hit by Surge, which does 25 damage every 5 seconds, which if continues for a long time will almost certainly end a team's game. Teams below this threshold can survive if they do more damage to other players and move themselves above the other teams on the leaderboard, who will now start to get hit by the Storm Surge until they do damage themselves. This forces teams to engage with each other, as if they don't, they will simply die. Even if teams don't completely fight, since teams are incentivized to shoot at each other, they will inevitably reduce their heals. Then when they start getting hit by the Storm Surge, they will be forced to engage in more aggressive fights, thinning out the lobby to a level that the servers can handle. The first iteration of Storm Surge was hilariously aggressive, with only 16 players being alive on the 50-50 zone before it started. I can't find exactly where this was changed to be more reasonable values, but by the start of Season 8 and World Cup qualifiers, Storm Surge looked a lot closer to its current form. But teams were completely clueless on how to actually play Storm Surge during this era. The main meta was just shoot your gun and hope your aim was good. There were very few set routes, and even if there were, they were incredibly basic. During the World Cup in Season X, players slowly adapted and started to claim power positions like mountains that sat above the rest of the lobby, increasing their sight lines and allowing them to rack up surge damage. But come Chapter 2, the Storm Surge meta would evolve faster than ever before. Starting in Season 1, teams were forced to innovate tons of new strategies because of the new FNCS game mode, Squads. To understand why Squads make Storm Surge much harder, I need to quickly explain how Storm Surge usually works in a team dynamic. Normally on top tier teams, there's one player who makes the majority of calls, the IGL. This IGL is usually more focused on figuring out a team's rotations, and therefore gets less damage compared to his fraggers. This is less true in modern Fortnite, but back in early Chapter 2, this was very commonplace. Therefore in squads, if 3 out of 4 people's primary goal is to get Storm Surge, then the Storm Surge values will be much higher. As a result, teams had to innovate and experiment with many Storm Surge strategies. Some teams attempted to out-heal the Storm Surge, while others abused grenades and used calculus to figure out how to perfectly align them in an almost uncounterable strategy, which is why we learned that we should never have throwable explosives in competitive again, right? But the main takeaway here is that players were innovating a ton during this era, and this is where I likely think that certain players started to come up with the idea of Storm Surge trading. And as Chapter 2 Season 2 started, players started to notice something weird in Slurpy Swamp. Bucky and Creo and Keys and Slacks every single game would loot up and then meet each other right outside of Slurpy and then take shots at each other. Then when they took damage, they could easily go back into the respective parts of their drop spots and use the slurp barrels to get all of their health back. They repeated the strategy over and over again to the point where it's obvious that it was a part of both team strategies. Certain pros started to catch on and quickly made a big deal of this blatant surge trading on Twitter. Fortnite's response to this was quick and harsh, banning all 4 players for 60 days, which would ban them all for the next 2 FNCSs. Although all players claimed their innocence, Fortnite didn't care, but this sparked tons of discussion around the community. Basically, everyone agreed that if there was an explicit conversation between teams saying, hey, you go here and I'll go here so we can safely trade Storm Surge, then those players should absolutely be banned. But what happens when teams just happen to end up in those positions? Unlike other esports, top pros scrim pretty much exclusively against the pros that they play top competitions against. This means that every team can learn over time where the best spots to trade Storm Surge are and create strategies around that. No explicit teaming happened, yet both teams still clearly gain an unfair advantage from this. But we will get back to this argument later. Also, during this time, there was another very similar situation when it came to rotating. Especially in solos, players realized that not shooting each other would be the best thing that everyone could do to make difficult rotations in a no mobility meta. So players came up with a special code, swinging your pickaxe. If a lot of players swung their pickaxes at each other, it was a universal code to tell everyone, hey, let's all not shoot at each other. This was an incredibly controversial subject, with some people thinking it was the only way to play the game, while others thought that it was blatant teaming and would intentionally target people pickaxe swinging. But similar to surge trading, it became an epidemic and Fortnite had to make a statement, and they came down on this hard, saying it was bannable. Basically, immediately, all pickaxe swinging stopped. As we continue with this Storm Surge trading conversation, I want you to keep this ruling and its impact in the back of your head. But continuing with how teams played Storm Surge throughout the rest of Chapter 2, the surge trading ban worked. Teams were significantly less likely to surge trade, and if they did, it was very minimal. These constraints caused Storm Surge to become one of the game's most complicated hidden mechanics. Top teams spent hours studying the other top teams' routes and strategies to find unique ways to find their surge. But as time passed, surge trading teams started to pop up again. Starting in Chapter 4, Trilix became notorious at Slappy Shores for trading with the team across the POI from him. This POI almost encouraged Storm Surge trading, as it was cut off in the middle by a bridge that was difficult to cross. This meant that in top tier lobbies, it was incredibly common for one team to land on the south side of the POI, while the other team landed on the north side. Each team would loot up their respective side and take shots at the other team. This caused controversy, yet nothing happened. Trilix played the entire chapter like this, and other teams were quick to catch on. But thanks to some nice circumstances, the beginning of Chapter 5 saw actually the least Storm Surge trading we have ever seen. This was mainly caused by the fact that the Storm Surge meta was all about fighting. This happened for three main reasons. The first was that this was the first season where guns had bullet drop. Players were still not used to this change, and long-range AR shots, which had typically been the meta, now became very hard to hit. The second was that the servers were massively improved this season. This allowed the best players to show off their mechanical prowess more and created a large enough skill gap to make fighting consistently worth it. The third was that there was a lot of really fast mobility with the crash pads being added, so you could easily jump on players and take quick fights. But this was a band-aid, not a true fix to the actual problem, as every meta can't be a full fighting meta. In Chapter 5 Season 2, the problem was honestly worse than most people remember, mainly because Peterbot went on such a generational run this season that focusing on literally anything else would be stupid. But in Chapter 5 Season 3, often considered one of the worst Fortnite seasons of all time, a new meta emerged: cactus trading. By this point in time, every top player was completely used to the bullet drop-off and could hit shots at long range. Along with a lot of other bad choices made in the season, one was adding cactuses. These are plants that you could hit and would give you 30 shields and would regenerate every 15 seconds. Teams started to claim certain cacti, and then they would sit in their base and trade surge with another team on a different cacti. There was literally zero risk to doing this strategy, and it allowed teams to rack up as much surge as they wanted. This strategy was so bad that teams like Queasy, who landed on the far north side of the map, rotated all the way down to the south side of the map where all the cacti were to trade surge. Instead of just claiming a POI, top teams would claim a POI and a cactus, letting everyone know that they would fight for that spot. Fortnite correctly saw this was a problem and removed the cactus's ability to regenerate in a hilariously vague tweet. Oh, why would you want to remove the cactus regeneration from July 26th to July 29th? I wonder what could be happening on that weekend. Oh. This decision caused even more backlash, as teams had planned their entire seasons around the cactus, and now 2 days before grand finals, they would need a new strategy. Everyone agreed this was the right call. It was just that the fact that this decision was made so late that was the problem. This resulted in a fascinating grand finals where the meta was kind of discovered on the fly and resulted in one of the most unique finals of all time. But with globals on the horizon, the community's excitement came back, and honestly, there weren't too many issues with surge trading throughout the global championships, and even when there were, they were massively outshadowed by the pure dominance of Peterbot. But come Fortnite OG Chapter 2, the Storm Surge trading meta came flaring back. In the Cash Cups, players quickly started to notice that many teams were trading sniper headshots. In a landmark decision, Fortnite banned 12 of these players for surge trading, but after some backlash, these players were unbanned and were told that the ban was incorrect. In my opinion, this was an incredibly important decision, and we will get to the long-standing ramifications of it. The problem also got worse because the game mode switched to trios. This meant that if one player did get knocked while trading Storm Surge, it would be much easier to revive them or fight a 2v3 compared to a 2v1. With the start of Chapter 6 removing bullet drop, and with a clear case showing that you wouldn't get punished for Storm Surge trading, you would expect the problem to flare back up, but it actually didn't for one main reason: the Oni mask. This is a mobility item that allowed you to teleport and cover large distances faster than ever before. In turn, this created a new risk for surge trading, as if you were knocked, the aggressing team could pressure you way faster and take you out of the lobby. But in Chapter 6 Season 2, surge trading went from a problem that could be ignored to the #1 conversation. Season 2 added black markets, which massively increased the amount of heals on the map. This, along with incredibly strong ARs, made surge trading inevitable. Teams started to make these large ramp bases and trade surge for 5 minutes straight. If you weren't trading, you were dying. It got so bad that even Peter, the best pure fighter in the world, whose surge strategy in the past was to fight another top tier team and dominate them, had to switch to surge trading, as constantly taking fights was simply not enough damage to stay above the surge thresholds. This is incredibly problematic, as for one, this is likely cheating, and two, this is boring as f. So now, the question is, how did this get so bad, and what can we do from here? I think the problem got so bad mainly because of a lack of enforcement. Once Bucky and Creo, along with Keys and Slacks, were banned, teams genuinely stopped surge trading. When there is an actual threat of being banned, players will actually follow the rules. When they think they can skirt the rules, they will. And I want to clarify, I'm not blaming any individual player for trading surge. If every single player is trading Storm Surge and not getting punished, you have to use this strategy or you will fall behind. For these top players, placing in tournaments is how they put food on the table, and you can't blame them for exploiting a system that if they don't, someone else will. I think the biggest mistake happened in the ruling in the Chapter 2 OG situation. For a while, players have started to test the waters on if they could get away with breaking the rules that hadn't been enforced in 4 years. And by banning players for trading Surge, it was a great step in the right direction. But by immediately unbanning the offending players, it shows that you have changed your mind and that you won't enforce the rules on any future offending players. If players can get an unfair advantage and you aren't going to enforce this, you can't blame players whose livelihood depends on winning tournaments to use these advantages. But how can we actually fix this issue? When looking at potential solutions, I want to categorize them into 4 buckets. When doing research for this video, I found suggestions of how we can fix surge trading, some varying of quality. But first, let's look at meta changes. This is probably the easiest to change, but also has the least impact. In competitive, there should never be something like cactuses or slurp plants that infinitely regenerate heals. Also, the heals that teams get throughout mid-map objectives should be massively reduced. Part of the reason why surge trading was so bad in Chapter 6 Season 2 was the black markets. Teams could rotate into the black markets and get tons of shield that they could trade later with. These solutions help by reducing the effectiveness of surge trading, but at the end of the day, they are a band-aid over a bullet wound. And to actually fix this issue, I think we need more aggressive action. So let's take a look at what more aggressive action could look like through our next category, mechanics changes. These are changes that physically change how Storm Surge work. First is removing Surge altogether. The servers have improved a lot since 2018, and there is some chance that they could handle all of the new players, but this brings up a different issue. If players have no incentive to fight, then literally every game will go to heal off, which also isn't fun. So, although this would work, it would likely lead to other very large issues. Some people have recommended a solution where you can only do a certain amount of damage to one player before it stops counting. This would make it so you can't repeatedly trade Surge with the same player over and over again, as you would just be wasting your time. I think this is an interesting solution, but making sure the threshold is calibrated correctly is incredibly important and delicate to balance. Make it too low and you create a lot of weird situations where players aren't rewarded for completely normal gameplay. Make it too high, and then you might as well not have the cap in the first place. Some more out there ideas is making Surge independent for every zone. This means that the Surge leaderboards only apply for one zone, and then they get reset back to 0 on the next zone. This would help the problem, but it wouldn't truly fix the issue, as teams would still be incentivized to trade early on, as they would still need to survive the early Storm Surges. Another mechanic change that I've seen recommended, and is in my opinion the best, is calculating Surge by net Surge. In this scenario, your total Storm Surge would be calculated by subtracting your damage taken from your total damage done. This solution would likely fix Surge trading, as you would be just as punished as you are rewarded for Storm Surge trading. And even in the scenario where you go way up on Surge on another team, the other team is severely punished, making it a zero-sum game. Currently, there's no risk to Surge trading, but in a net Surge system, every reward would be matched by an even risk. There are a few issues with the net Surge system, but they either have fairly easy fixes or are way less problematic than Surge trading. One issue with a net Surge system is that right now, if you die and get rebooted, you lose all of your Storm Surge that you have gotten. In a net Surge system, it is possible to have a negative Surge, so it could be possible to intentionally die to reset your Surge. This could be easily fixed by simply not removing Surge when you're rebooted. Another issue is that net Surge makes the game even more zone reliant. If you pull a partial zone, for example, you have a huge advantage over the teams who have to rotate. This is the biggest trade-off I see with a net Surge system, but I think this is a better outcome than infinite Surge trading. My hope is that this could be the first tested option if someone from Epic Games is watching it. Just try it in an eval cup and see what happens. If it works, then great. If it doesn't, then this is what the rest of this video will try and tackle. If changing the Storm Surge mechanic doesn't seem to help, what are some rule changes that could help? One I've seen recommended is putting a cap on how much you could trade Surge before it becomes a bannable offense. I don't like this approach, as it will inevitably lead to weird edge case scenarios, and I think a damage cap is a better solution anyways. The other rule change that they could implement is banning specific bases. Let's be honest, these egregious ramp bases clearly have one purpose and one purpose only: to trade Surge. I really don't like this solution for 2 reasons. One, if you ban one base, another variation will show up, And 2, I don't like the precedent that banning base is set. Overall, I don't think that changing the rules is the best route to go down, as it just leads to a lot of edge cases and it's really hard to define. But the last category is what I think is the most important. Enforcement. After Bucky and Creo, along with Keys and Slacks, were banned in early 2020 for Surge trading, we saw a massive reduction for almost 3 years. Players were legitimately scared to trade Surge, and the threat of being banned kept players at bay. But over time, players will try to push the rules, and when they don't get punished, they will keep pushing the rules even further. Going back to the Chapter 2 OG case, I think it was a huge mistake to not keep the 12 offending players banned. For those 12 players, it's a little unfortunate that they would have to be the scapegoat, but if you don't ban someone, the issue will continue to get worse. At this point, it's too late to go back, but in the future, Storm Surge trading needs to be publicly stated as a bannable offense. Ideally, this would come in a blog post stating that any future trading would result in a ban. Then you actually have to ban someone. And for that one or few players that actually get banned, it will be quote unquote unfair, but the longer we let this go on, the worse it's going to get until a decision will have to be made. Let's stop the snowball now before the problem gets further out of hand, because if Storm Surge doesn't change, the incentives to trade won't change, and this will only get worse as time moves on. So let's wrap up this whole argument. I think the best way to handle Surge trading is to first implement and test a net Surge system. In my opinion, this best fixes Surge trading, as any trading comes with an equal risk. If this solution doesn't end up working, I think the next best thing Fortnite can do is implement a much stricter Surge trading enforcement policy. Start with a warning to all players, and when someone inevitably tries to push the boundaries, you have to ban them and stick to your guns about it. Players will find other solutions to Storm Surge if trading is bannable that isn't teaming, and as long as you don't let it get out of hand, the issue will fix itself. So what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below, as I want to continue this conversation and see what you guys have to say. But with all that being said, if you enjoyed this video, then YouTube also thinks you'll enjoy this video as well. See you next time.